Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are going to get into 5 scandals that didn't just shake the European Union to its core. Nope. They actually laid bare its biggest flaws, but also, and this is the crazy part, ended up making it stronger.
All right, let's just jump right in with a number. A huge one, 150 billion euros. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. That's the estimated price tag of Europe's single biggest tax heist. And believe it or not, that's just a taste of what we're digging into today.
So, what does it take for a scandal to be that big? I mean, big enough to shake an entire continent. It's not just about the eye-watering sums of money, right? It's about its power to completely wreck public trust, bring down governments, and force some really deep fundamental changes.
To really get a grip on this, we're going to look at each scandal through a specific lens. We've got 4 criteria. First, the money. Just how much are we talking about? Second, the political fallout. Who got fired or had to resign? Third, the societal harm. How did this actually hurt real people? And finally, the legislative impact. What laws were created because of all this mess? All right, let's get to it. We're going to look at 5 major scandals. And what's fascinating is that each one is like a different face of failure. A totally unique way the whole system can just break.
Okay, first up, we're rewinding to 1999. This one was a crisis of, well, integrity. It all blew up thanks to a whistleblower, a guy named Paul von Wittenen, who basically lifted the lid on a whole mess of mismanagement and cronyism right at the heart of the EU.
And here's the thing that makes this one so interesting. It wasn't really about people stealing money for themselves. The real problem, the archetype here, was institutional decay. You had this closed culture where the European Commission, the EU's executive branch, had pretty much lost control of its own people and processes. It was just rotting from the inside.
And the fallout? Whoa, it was total. I mean, for the first and only time in the history of the EU, the entire European Commission, all 20 of them, had to resign. It was a political earthquake, and it permanently changed the balance of power, giving a lot more clout to the European Parliament.
Okay, moving on. Next, we've got the Cum-Ex Files. And we're not talking about mismanagement anymore. This was straight up, highly sophisticated fraud. So big, in fact, that it's literally been called the biggest tax heist in European history. Yeah, you heard that right.
So this gives us our second archetype, the Great Heist. And this wasn't just one rogue villain. No, this was a whole network. We're talking bankers, top-tier lawyers, traders, all working together. They basically used the system's own complexity as a weapon to steal money. Your money, directly from public treasuries.
And the amount of money involved, it's just mind-boggling. Taxpayers in countries like Germany, France, Italy, and others lost somewhere between 55 and 150 billion euros. This wasn't a pickpocket operation. This was organized looting on an industrial scale.
All right, our next scandal is a bit of a mind-bender. It wasn't about people breaking the law, it was about how the law itself was the weapon. This is LuxLeaks. Another whistleblower, Antoine Deltour, pulled back the curtain on a secret system of, well, state-approved tax dodging.
And this shows us a totally different type of failure, the state sanction scheme. You've got the government of Luxembourg, a founding member of the EU, secretly giving these super sweet tax deals to more than 340 huge multinational companies. We're talking about household names like Amazon and Apple. These deals let them pay less than 1% in taxes. 1%. Now, the harm here was huge, but it wasn't Luxembourg that was feeling the pain. It was all the other EU countries. Estimates say this scheme was costing its EU partners up to 70 billion euros in lost taxes every single year.
So, we've had institutional decay and state-sponsored schemes. Now let's turn to good old-fashioned corporate fraud on a massive scale. Remember 2015? The year it came out that Volkswagen, Europe's biggest car company, was intentionally cheating on emissions tests all over the world.
Our archetype here is a really nasty mix: corporate fraud and regulatory capture. Volkswagen installed these things called defeat devices in their cars to fool the tests. And how did they get away with it for so long? Because the national regulators, the very people whose job it was to catch them, were basically in the pocket of the car industry. They were looking the other way.
And the harm? This time, it wasn't about money. It was about people's lives. A recent study actually linked the extra pollution from these cheating cars to an estimated 124,000 premature deaths across Europe, Just think about that. A staggering, tragic human cost.
And that brings us to our final case, Catagate. This one is just raw, old-school political corruption. A scandal that hit the absolute core of European democracy, the European Parliament itself.
Yeah, there's no fancy financial engineering here. The archetype is simple. The classic bribe. Members of the European Parliament and their aides allegedly taking cash from foreign governments to push their agendas. And the evidence? I mean, come on. Police found suitcases literally filled with cash. They seized over 1.5 million euros in cash from the suspects' homes. What this scandal really did was throw a massive spotlight on how weak the EU's ethics and lobbying rules were, and just how open they were to outside influence.
Okay, so we have institutional rot from 1999 and straight-up bribery in 2022. They seem totally different, right? But when you step back and look at all 5 of these scandals together, you start to see some really clear and, frankly, worrying patterns.
You see the same flaws showing up again and again. The bad guys are always exploiting that gap between having one giant EU market but having 27 different national police forces. They use complexity, legal and financial, like a smokescreen. And over, the EU's own internal checks and balances just fail to do their job.
But you know what might be the most revealing pattern of all? It's who catches them. It's almost never the EU's own internal watchdogs. In pretty much every case, the whistle was blown by an outsider, a brave employee, an investigative journalist, or, in the case of Dieselgate, regulators from across the Atlantic, in the US. Kind of ironic, don't you think?
And this all points to this giant paradox at the heart of the EU. So much of its history is a story of reform that's driven by scandal. It seems like real, significant change only happens after a massive public crisis forces its hand. And you can draw a straight line from failure to reform. The Santer Commission disaster, that gave birth to the EU's anti-fraud office, OLAF. The LuxLeaks embarrassment, it led directly to new tax transparency laws. Dieselgate, that forced a total rethink of how they test car emissions. It's this constant cycle, crisis, then reform, crisis, then reform.
So this is the big question we're left with, isn't it? The EU is pretty good at cleaning up its own messes. It proves time and again that it can learn from its mistakes. But after decades of just reacting to disasters, can it finally break that cycle? Can it build a system that's proactive, not reactive? A system that can actually stop the next big scandal before it happens?